Hi folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and this week I paid homage to one of history's greatest rivalries, Plants vs. Zombies. And in keeping things spicy, I'm going to switch up the construction of said Plants vs. Zombies by making the zombie first. Of course, the first step in making a zombie is making a pair of legs and getting the pose correct. With the perfect pose put in place, I can begin the enclaying process. Normally I'll build up the body with a layer of foil, but I want what's visible to be a skinny little zombie leg, so I'm just going to slap the clay straight onto the wire. I also started out just building the body parts that I knew were going to be visible under the rips in the clothing before quickly realizing that this was a stupid idea and makes for a lot of unnecessary work, so in the end I'm just going to build up the basic body zombie and add the clothing later. I've also built the torso entirely from clay with the intention of punching a hole through the zombie's chest where the peashooter shot pea will be passing through his body. A little strategic poking and prodding with some ball styluses will goop up the gaping hole, and I can add some last little battle damage to the rest of the body before jamming some rods into the shoulders and reposing the arms in a flailing backwards as a cannonball-sized pea erupts out your spine sort of a pose. I'll then wrap these armature arms in a thin layer of clay, refining the shape but keeping it simple since it'll be covered in a coat anyways. Finally, I'll fit a long pointy neck onto the torso that will act as a clay armature for the future head. To make his tiny zombie hands, I'll start by adding a little mitten to the arm nub and adding some little fingers with a pair of tweezers since I can't find my scissors before pinching and pulling to create some long zombie digits that then get an accompanying thumb. A handy hand-shaped shaping pair of silicone-tipped tweezers will help reshape the fingers into that aforementioned getting shot through the chest look, and I'll repeat this for the other arm before fitting a head-shaped head onto the neck and blending that into the body. A quick facial reshaping and I can poke some eye sockets into the front of the face and fill said eye sockets with eyeballs before pushing the surrounding skin up to create some wonky eyelids. I'll then jam my tool into the front of his face and create an oversized, extra screamy zombie mouth and poke some sniffing holes sans the nose between his eyes, and then it's time to refine the shape of the overall face before building up the gum line so I can fit some pre-baked top and bottom sets of teeth in place, which you'll just have to imagine since the autofocus on my camera is having a seizure. With the teeth in place, I can frame up the bottom jaw just a bit more and begin poking stretch marks into the cheek and adding lots of little wormy dealies to connect the top and bottom jaw. Finally, I'll fit a tongue in place and I can add a couple hearing hoops to the sides of his head and some scapular damage on top of that. Otherwise, with that done, the zombie part of the zombie is finished, so it's on to making his clothing, starting with some brown lumpy potatoes for his feet and a lump of blue to cover up his Ken doll dong. To make the ripped blue jeans look ripped, I'll rip some blue jean blue clay into shreds and stick that around the various ripped parts of his legs, building up the connecting bits with bits of unripped blue jean blue clay until I've got a nice solid set of slightly ripped blue jeans. I'll then add that little leftover bit of blue jean just above the boot, and I can work my way around the legs, adding lots of little wrinkles and rips and tears, focusing on making sure all that fabric is facing forward so it looks like the momentum of the pea shot has pushed him backwards. Only the front of his shirt is going to be visible, so I'm only going to make the front of his shirt, cutting the collar out before poking a hole through the center where the pea will pass through his body. Otherwise, with my pea hole clearly visible, I can add his jacket on top. I've made this in a couple sections so that I can more easily refine the shape of the open front, but once I've added both the sides, I can then connect the pieces around the back with lots of leathery brown clay, keeping the back side of my hole on display. A couple thin sheets of brown clay wrapped around the arms will be the arms, and I'll add a little cuff to each to finish the jacket off before using some tweezers to fray the edge and make it look like well-worn and battered leather. Finally, lots of wrinkles around the arms and any part of the jacket that's twisting, and a final repositioning for dramatic effect, as well as some extra fabric around the back hole to highlight the velocity of the kill shot. Otherwise, the final piece to the zombie puzzle is adding his little red tie, which I made off camera and baked to ensure it would hold its shape when it was attached. With that, this zombie is done though, so it's time to make some plants. Now there's a lot of options for plants, but I'm a sucker for the basics, so I'm going to go with the tried, tested, and true combo of a sunflower guarding a pea shooter. To make the pea shooter, I'll pinch and pull a ball of green clay into a slightly wonky egg shape, then using a ball stylus, I'll reshape the top of the egg to create a pea shooter mouth. A little carving and reshaping will carve and reshape the mouth, and I'll run the ball stylus back and forth on the exterior to create some veiny, plant-like texture before poking some eye sockets and filling those eye sockets with some blank black eyeballs. I'll make the eyes a little angrier by adding some big eyebrows on the tops and blending them in to make it look a little bit more natural. With the head baked, I can then insert a little wire into the underside and wrap said wire in a thin layer of clay to create the stem before setting the pea shooter aside so I can make its leaves. I've rolled a little sheet of green clay that I can then cut the leaves out of using a sharp scalpel since I can't find my bendy knives anywhere, before adding a little bit of detail to the top of the leaves by pressing texture into the top and cutting little nicks into the sides. To give the leaves a bit of curl while baking, I'll drape them over some curved armature wire, then once they've cooled down, I can stick them into the still soft clay of the pea shooter's stem. One final tiny leaf can get attached to the back of the pea shooter's head, and well, that's kinda it. There's not a whole lot to do with this guy, so I can set him aside and get started on the sunflower. I'll start with a stem this time, taking a length of wire and wrapping it around a socket to create a hoop that I'll then bend back on itself and extend out the back. This hoop can then be filled with green clay to facilitate the impetaling of the sunflower. To make the petals, I'll pull little blobs of yellow clay off the ball, then roll and smoosh it into little petally shapes before sticking it onto the flower. Repeat this process a whole bunch of times until the flower is rimmed in petals, at which point I can use some silicone tip tweezers to add some texture to each petal. I'll then repeat these steps but with green clay to add the not quite right petals to the back of the flower, working my way back towards the stem. Before getting to work making the stem though, I'll smoosh a yellow blob into the center of the flower and spread it to each corner of the circle. Then a couple big old black eyes can be pressed into the face before getting some oversized eyelids attached to the top and bottom of each eye. I figured if the pea shooter is angry, then the sunflower is essentially a hippie stoner basking in the sunlight. I'll carve a happy smile into the bottom of the face, then open it up and add some wrinkles so it looks a bit more gormless than happy, and that's the sunflower face finished, so I can add some little leafy fingers onto a thin piece of wire that I wrapped around the middle of the stem. Once these hands are in place, I can wrap the whole stem in some more green clay, add some leafy, stemmy texture along the length, then finish it all off with some lovely cabbagey leaves. With that, my sunflower is finished, which means that's the sculpting done, and it's on to adding a bit more color to my already mostly colored characters. I'll give both of the plants an initial wash with a heavy green to add a bit of variation to the otherwise flat green of the clay, then I'll give the head of the pea shooter a couple coats of lighter green so that it stands out against the darker green of its body. The sunflower face gets a darker yellow highlight around the edge and the inside of the petals, then I'll wet blend a lighter yellow onto the tips of the petals and the center of the face before using a big fat brush to stipple an even lighter yellow, sun bursting out from the center of the face. The inside of the mouth gets a pinkish reddish hue before working my way around all the green leafy bits of both plants with a series of progressively lighter green dry brushes to bring some of that texture to the front. Finally, I'll paint the eyes of both plants pitch black, followed by a glossy, high-gloss varnish to give them a little life. That same varnish can then go into their mouths to make them nice and goopy, and it's on to the zombie. Before I get to the painting though, his smile's a bit too toothy, so I'll knock a couple teeth out with a scalpel and some tweezers. For the skin tones, I'll start with a nice fleshy bluish-green base tone to set the hue, then work my way through a series of lighter, whiter bluish greens, wet blended in until I've got a nice corpse flesh fade. I want the leather jacket to look well worn, so I'll start the leather weathering by sponging a couple shades of beiges and light browns haphazardly around the jacket, sticking to the folds and creases where possible. A final pass with a bone white to touch up the sharper edges, and I'll consolidate all the colors by giving the entire jacket a couple coats of brown glaze. The glazes will tie all the colors together, leaving me with a pretty natural looking weathered leather jacket. The boring brown leather boots get a boring brown basic top coat, and the exposed white collared shirt gets a couple coats of gray wash to dirty it up, and I'll give the tie the ever-important white stripes. Finally, the blue jeans get a dark blue wash to add lots of recess shading to all those wrinkles, followed by a very heavy-handed light blue dry brushing to make those jeans look extra worn and weathered. I'll then work my way around the body, adding an initial watery terracotta wash to all the exposed battle damage bits and around the mouth and eyes and on the inside of the gaping chest wound. Then I'll work my way around again with a gory blood red to add lots of little blood splatters and stains. Finally, I'll touch up the eyes with a bit of white to give this guy the ever-important zombie cataracts. Now to make the pea bursting out of the back of the zombie, I baked a little green ball, and to make it fly, I'll stick it onto a little length of acrylic rod, and to make it gory, I'll mix up some Oohoo glue with a little bit of gory red paint. This stuff mixes up nicely to create some goopy, stringy red bits that will also go a long way in holding that acrylic rod in place. I'll coat both the inside of the zombie and the tip of the rod in Oohoo goo, then fit them together before adding more goopy red goo to the front of the pea, stretching it backwards so it sticks to the zombie. With that, the bloody murder bullet is done, and all that's left to do is add a little bit of gloss to the various bits of the zombie so he looks nice and goopy. Otherwise, that's our 3 combatants finished, so all that's left to do is make a backyard. To make my backyard, I'll take this perfectly sized piece of MDF that I cut to the perfect size and paint it black. The original Plants vs. Zombies took place in a gridded backyard with some patio stones off to the left, which I'll make out of this thin strip of foam glued onto the side of the MDF board and textured with a rock and cracked with a scalpel. I'll then give it a couple coats of patio stone gray followed by a dirty black wash to add some shading. I'll then dab away the excess, and once that's dried, I can then give it a couple dry brushing coats with a bone white and a white. To make the lawn, I'll mix up some soil by combining 1 part hole filler, 1 part PVA glue, 1 part brown paint, and 1 part black paint, then mixing that all together and slapping it onto the surface and spreading it out like a delicious chocolate cake. The benefit of using PVA glue in the mix is that not only will it be a little bit stronger, but it'll also be a little bit stickier, so I can immediately add my static grass on top. This is a freshly mowed lawn, so I'll use the shorter 3mm static grass loaded into my static grass applicator, making sure to dump half of it onto my desk instead. A little shaky working my way across the surface will drop the static grass onto the still sticky soil, creating a delightful grassy lawn. Now to make the grid, I'll cut out a couple sheets of cardstock that I can lay on top of the lawn and weigh down with some weights. This will then let me spray a lighter green on top of the exposed grass, creating an ever so slightly visible grassy green grid for my characters. All I have to do then is make the white picket fence, which I'll make by cutting these tongue depressors in half. I'll then line them up using the lawn as a spacing gauge and add some little stir sticks running horizontally across the posts. Some tape will keep the posts in place while a little hot glue will stick it all together. Finally, I'll paint the white picket fence with a white picket fence white paint, and it's ready to be glued onto the backside of my battleground. With the fence in place, I can then sprinkle a little flocking onto the lawn to imitate the various clover and whatnot that's growing on the grass, and I can start drilling the mounting holes for my plants and zombie. With the holes in the board, I can finally fit my threesome in place. I'll put the peashooter at the back and the sunflower in the front, and I snip the wire from the zombie's foot so I can lean him backwards off balance. Otherwise, that's us finished here and on to the glamour shots. As always, a big ol' thank you to the fine folk over on Patreon, and a special hey how are ya to the newest of them, Lexi Huntley, Jericho Woodward, Niam, Peter Campbell, Pokey Paw, The Left Raven, Happy Birthday Colette, and Happy Birthday Connor. Mornings suck. You are the gaping chest wound that lets this pea projectile of creativity soar free. As always, don't forget to like that smash button and do all the other things as well, otherwise we'll see you next time. Cheers.